Welcome back to Alice Customs Project Car TV. I'm starting a new long-term series on my Honda Pilot. Now this is my daily driver. My wife bought this car new in 2007. It's, what does that make it, 16 years old now. It's got 172,000 miles on it, and it's the EXL, I believe is the model. Leather interior, no entertainment system, you know, it's like nowhere near the top of the line, but it was, you know, one of the nicer models at the time. It's two-wheel drive, has the V6. I don't know what else to say about it. We've had it, we've driven it a lot. Some of you longtime viewers will remember approximately 6 years ago, we hit a deer coming down from the mountains, and it took out the grill and the bumper cover, this headlight and the fender, put a crack up in the top of the windshield. So value-wise, I just looked it up on Kelley Blue Book. They estimate if I was selling this to a private individual, you know, it was a private sale, I should be able to sell it for $4,000 to $6,000. So we hit the middle of that, it's $5,000. There's no damage on the car. Everything functions correctly. It's got a lot of miles. There's plenty of parking lot dings, but there's all the paint's here. And the repair, I did the repair myself, but I did it to insurance standards. Good or bad, but that's, I wanted it to be as close to original as possible. All the pieces that we used are Honda replacement parts. That's kind of the short, quick history of the car. My wife drove it for the first 140,000-ish miles. I've driven it the last 30,000 miles, and I drive it about 120 miles a week for probably 45-ish weeks a year, maybe a little less than that. If we could start getting some big heavy snows, I don't take it to work, I take my four-wheel drive truck. When it's here, it sits under a carport. When it goes to work with me, it sits in a parking lot at the airport for anywhere from 3 to 6 days at a time. Its first 140,000 miles and probably the first 12 years of its life, it was always kept garaged, rarely sat outside other than in a parking lot at the grocery store or something. So it's been well taken care of. I've always done all the service work on it. I probably do more often than I need to, but that's just, you know, I want to keep the vehicle in as good a shape as possible because it's my daily driver. The point of the series is, what if you have a vehicle like this, you want to bring back up into a good roadworthy condition, whether you've just bought the vehicle, whether you've had a vehicle new for 15 or 20 years, and now you're going to hand it off maybe to one of your kids to drive to high school or drive to college, or you're going to continue to drive it yourself, but you've just, you know, you haven't maintained everything every time, or you didn't have the skills, or you didn't have the money. So we're going to just kind of go through over the course of probably the next year, getting the car fully brought up to good safety standards. So if it needs brakes, we'll go through the brakes. If it needs struts and shocks, we're going to do that. If the carpet's kind of iffy, so we may replace it, we may just pull the seats out and just scrub the heck out of it. The car kind of needs some love and attention. Headlights are cloudy as all get out, so this one's not so bad because it was replaced 6 years ago. This one's 17 years old. So I'm going to look at replacing headlights, maybe updating bulbs to LEDs or HIDs or something else maybe that helps get better light out in front of you at night, because I drive through dark 2-lane roads coming back from the airport a lot. So the goal is just to generally freshen the car up and make it a great daily driver for, say, another 5 years, or even beyond that into the future. I just don't put that many miles on it. So to that end, we have a sponsor for the beginning of this project, Autosaver 88, which is an Amazon reseller. The parts have been shipped directly from China, made in China. And the big box here is the first kit, which is a strut and shock kit. Now these should be loaded struts and rear shocks. And then I have a second box, and this is from the same supplier. This is their lower control arm kit. It is supposed to include the lower control arms, the steering links, the outer tie rod, and sway bar links. And we may find that there's other parts we need to replace as we're going through it, in which case we'll order those in, install them, bushings or whatever. But Autosaver 88 came on board, made an offer to supply us with some parts, and we told them we'd give them a fair and honest review of them. So part of that is to unbox them, and we'll do that. I can tell you the condition of the box is fairly beat up. It's been torn and retaped multiple times, it appears. Now that might have been done by the shipping companies, that might have been done by the supplier. I have no idea, but, you know. Got some packing material. Got 2 boxes, part numbers A0174. Alright, these are rear shocks. Got 2 of those. We have a customer support hotline phone number. We'll hang on to that in case we find any issues. Some more packing material. And then we have 2 boxes with the struts in them. Strut part numbers are listed on the outside of the box. Really no other information on the box. Kind of see in there. It's got a little bit of packing material on each end. And the parts wrapped in a plastic bag. Now when I hit that deer in this car 7 years ago, or 6 years ago, so I replaced shocks and struts at the time I had the accident damage from hitting that deer. And that was just to kind of bring the car up to snuff at the time. They were 10 years old at that time. The ones I replaced them with are now 6 years old. And I didn't buy Honda replacement parts for those. I mean, you know, Honda branded replacement parts or anything like that for those. I just bought whatever was fairly inexpensive on, I think, Rock Auto was where I got the parts at that time. So these, you know, from what I can remember, these look very similar. They seem to have all the proper brackets. Appears to have a good application of gloss black paint on it. It does come with a single sheet of installation or removal and installation instructions. Does not appear to give like torque settings for the different bolts, basically telling you to check with the manufacturer. But it does tell you plan to reuse your existing hardware. So we've got 2 of the struts, a left and a right. As far as any other information on them, they each have a printed part number and nothing else. If it wasn't for what's printed on the label on the outside of the box that says made in China, there'd be no information here as to where they came from. In addition to the strut and the shock, like I said before, we have the lower control arm kit. Again, the outside of the box says made in China. The box is fairly beat up again. But as far as parts, we have 2 sway bar connectors, a cast lower control arm with the ball joint, and it does come a little baggy with the cotter pin. The bushings look to be rubber. Should be a good replacement for a daily driver. Overall, it looks to be pretty good quality. I don't see anything glaringly obvious. Comes with the same little contact information sheet. Comes with a very small set of instructions. We have steering rack arm, 2 of those. We have 2 different part number tie rods, and our second control arm. All right, for the size of the table here, I'm going to limit myself to 1 strut, 1 A-arm, 1 shock, but everything else is here. The rack and pinion links are identical numbers. The sway bar links are identical numbers. One of our sway bar links came with both nuts. One only came with one. They both came with the grease fittings. I think that's 10 millimeter probably for the size. Both the links for the rack and pinion did come with their own jam nut. And our tie rod links came with nylock nuts for those. Both of the A-arms came with the castle nut and a cotter pin in a separate little baggie, so we got to watch for that. Overall, everything looks to be in good condition. Missing the one nut, not a big deal. I'll find another one, and like I said, it's almost certainly 10 millimeter. So we'll get this thing in the air, pull the tires off, and see if we can't start replacing some of these parts, and see what else is all might be worn out under there, so that we can do a complete rebuild. Because once we're done putting these shocks and the lower arms, not so much, but once we put the new strut in, we will have to have an alignment done. So we got to budget not only for the parts, but we're going to need to budget for an alignment. These parts were sent to us by the sponsor, and at no cost to me, so that I'm just trying to be fair with what information I give you. I will put links in the description to the parts and to the seller, Autosaver 88, to their Amazon store, and so that you can see the prices. I can tell you, I went and looked at the prices. They are very comparable to what you could buy all of these parts for at other suppliers. So they're a good price as long as the product mounts and does what it's supposed to do properly. So let's get on to that part of this. Okay, so I've got the tires off the vehicle, put it up on the lift. You don't need a lift to do this job. It just makes it easier for me to do it, and it makes it easier for me to film it. This is my daily driver. I didn't even bother to wash it before I showed you the inside of this. I did just kind of do a general inspection of parts and things to look at, and the things that you're going to want to look at are, how are your brakes? These brakes were replaced 6 years ago. During that accident, I bought, I believe it's Power Stop, not because it's drilled and slotted, although it kind of looks cool. I did it because the rotors have a coating on them that protects against rust everywhere that your pad is not actually touching the rotor. So that was my goal, was to get that extra protection for the rotor, so you didn't see a rusty rotor through the factory wheel, which is slotted or 5-spoked. Looking everything over, the brakes are still in great condition, probably more than half the life left. The rear is the same. Brake hoses look to be in good shape. I can see the motor mounts, they appear to be in great shape. I can see the bushings on the sway bar, they appear to be in good shape. But back here on this sway bar, or on this lower control arm, this bushing is torn and got a bunch of wear marks in it. So it's good we're replacing that. One issue we're going to have is our new kit did not come with boots for the rack and pinion setup. So we either need to manage to salvage these boots, and then if you go back, we have a video on the clamps that you use on these types of boots. So we've got the tools, we've got the clamps, so if we can get these off without damaging them, then we can reuse the boot, put it all back together. If not, we'll have to source some new boots. So I just used some WD-40 out of the Sure Shot sprayer here to put a little bit of lube on all of the bolts and nuts that we're going to be messing with. I did everything on the rear suspension as well, as that way as we're starting to mess around back there, if we start to find damage, we can go ahead and yank the parts off to get new ones ordered, and then we'll put them back on before we, like I said, before we would do an alignment on the truck. So let's get some tools out and break some of these bolts loose, get these pieces out of the way. I've been thinking about what I was going to name this series, and I think it's going to be called Reviving Your Daily Driver. Whether it's a 2007 Honda Pilot or whether it's a 2010 Toyota Corolla, it really doesn't matter. You're going to need to check the same kinds of things. And then get the owner's manual out and look and see what they recommend for different service intervals, you know, at 30,000, 50,000, 100,000 miles. A couple of tools for you. I've got to take a cotter pin out. A lot of times when you buy a screwdriver kit, you get two tools that look like this. here's what they're for. This one with the 90-degree hook, and it has a little offset on one side. This is for pulling cotter pins so that you can get in that loop on the end of it, straighten out the tines as much as you can with a pair of pliers or nippers, and gives you a way to try and leverage it out of there, or pull on it while you're, maybe smacking it with a little hammer on the backside, trying to force it back through the hole. This other one, which has a little different shape to it, and it is for going, you take loose a clamp on a heater hose or a radiator hose, and then you shove this in around the hose, inside the hose, between it and the neck it's mounted to, and you can go around the hose to break it loose, and then you can also use it to help you pull the hose off. So for those of you who have a couple of these tools and never really knew what they were for, there you go. So you could attempt to use a pickle fork and shove it between this boot and the casting part here for the upright on the steering, and it would tear up this boot, which if you're replacing this, who cares, no big deal. But if you're not replacing this, if you need to reuse this and you're taking it apart for some other reason, there's a flat right here, and most knuckles have it so that you can hit this pretty hard with a hammer. And what happens is the hole that this bush or this ball joint is in will oblong just briefly. It goes from being round to kind of oval shaped, and that should let that pop out of there. So that's what we're going to try. All right, the hammer trick didn't work, but using a ball joint puller does. I like this particular kind, and I think this just came from O'Reilly's or AutoZone or something. It's nothing special. They're not very expensive. Part number 513241, and I'll try and find them for you, put a link in the description. But that one works really well on the smaller ball joints. The driver's side and the new strut replacement, and as you can see, they look extremely similar. The boot on this one covers the lower part of the strut area. This one, they had it slid up and covered the bump stop that was built in, which is going to leave that the top part of this strut, so right in here you can see the chrome of the piston. That's going to be able to get muddy and dirty, and really this boot should be covering all of this area, not just down here at the bottom. So we do risk collecting some dirt that could transfer. Now it does cover the part that goes into the shock itself, or the shock body, so it should protect most of it. But from a design standpoint, I think I would prefer to see the boot come all the way from the hat all the way down as far as possible, to prevent any of that shaft that moves in and out of the seals collecting any dirt. The bump stop on the new one probably will prevent at least part of that, but we'll see over time. Now beyond that, brackets seem to be in the same locations. Overall, it looks very similar. Installation of this part is the opposite of what we just did. I'll put the top in first, get at least one, get some of these nuts started, and then I'll run it in up from there. So let me go get that started. there you go. So pounded on it, had loosened up the ball joint, and as soon as I got it to slide out, it fell right out all by itself. So on this sway bar link, and you can see the boot was torn, so it was time to replace this one as well. Here's the original Honda version versus the Autosaver 88 version. Has the sealed boot. The grease is going to stay in there. This is not. This is going to eventually, lead to problems because that's going to allow dirt and other crud to get in there, and you're going to constantly need to be putting grease in it, or it's going to wear out very, very quickly compared to the original Honda version. Now the shaft is a larger diameter than the Honda, which just means somebody either used a weaker material or somebody didn't check the engineering on what strength you actually needed to provide this job, because obviously the Honda lasted 170,000 miles. I doubt this will last that long. Doesn't mean it's not a good serviceable replacement part, but you may be replacing it again in another 10 or 20,000 miles, or it may last you 50 or 60,000. We're just going to have to wait and see on that. Got to put grease in them regularly, or these are going to be a problem. Now, one nice feature is there is a nut built into this stud, and that's going to allow us to make it easier to tighten, and if we do have to replace them, to be able to put a wrench on there and take the nut off. So those flats are going to make it a little easier to to replace than the factory Honda version. Okay, so I just couldn't figure out a way to get a good camera angle in there for you to see me removing this. And this is the steering arm for this side of the driver's side of the truck. Mounts in like so on the back side here, and it goes, this side bolts into the rack and pinion unit. Now there's just a regular spring clamp that was on this end of the boot. What you're going to do is take that off, slide it forward. There's a CV boot type clamp on the back side of this boot. The boot is still in great shape, so we're not going to have to replace it. You're going to have to pull really hard and pull that boot away from this knuckle. And this one's not too bad. It's still pretty tight. This end is okay. It's a little loose. But what we want is to unscrew this from the rack and pinion system, and there's a washer on here that we're going to need to reuse, so it came off with the thread, so we'll just clean it up, straighten it out a little bit, and put it back on. And then it has two ears that you're going to bend over on these flats of the joint, and that's kind of what helps lock it in, because the little ears on the washer lock into the rack and pinion unit. Alright, so what we've got left is to do the shocks on both sides. This is the passenger rear right now. So we're going to be pulling a bolt here and a bolt down here, placing the shock, and then be ready to put tires back on. Well, that's it for episode 1 of what I'm calling Revive Your Daily Driver. Now, like I said, it doesn't matter whether it's a Honda Pilot or any number of other vehicles out there, domestic, foreign, just doesn't matter. What does matter is you get in there and catch up with some of the forgotten maintenance, or if you're just buying the vehicle, do a bunch of the maintenance that you can probably bet previous owners didn't do, and that's why they got rid of the vehicle. So we've done struts, both sides, shocks. Now they were loaded struts, so we didn't have to deal with the spring and all that. That's the way I recommend buying them, plus you get a new spring out of it. We did shocks on the rear, we did the lower control arms. That takes care of all the bushings in the front, takes care of all the suspension in the front. So the only piece that we had to have that did not come with our kit is that when we took that boot off of the rack and pinion unit to put it back on, we were able to save the boots. They were in good shape, but we needed a clamp to clamp those back on. Now, these are called dog ear clamps or CV boot clamps, a lot of people call them, even though we're doing them on steering boots. So they're much smaller than your CV boot would be, but you do need a special tool for that. I did have a video of that a while back. I'll try and put a link in the description for that. So the parts that Autosaver 88 sent us, the struts, the lower control arms, all the bushings, everything, all of that's going to put this vehicle another 50 to 70,000 miles down the road before we're looking at any other major maintenance on those components. Now, it took quite a while yesterday to get this first side done, moving the cameras and all that around. I timed myself on the other side today, and it was 2 hours and 4 minutes to do everything on the passenger side. One thing I did is I pulled stuff loose and I was putting it back together, and I kind of got ahead of myself, and when I was putting the lower control arm in, I let the spindle upright kind of pull out, which popped the CV joint out, which also broke the wires to the speed sensor on that side. So I got to order a new speed sensor for the passenger side, $25. It was available on Rock Auto as well as Amazon, easy to get. And then I was able to pop the CV joint back in. Well, one of the things I noticed when the CV joint was apart was I'd already been noticing I had some noise. So in a future episode, we'll be doing CV joint or CV axles on both sides. We're just going to do the whole axle. Not going to try and just rebuild a joint itself. With that done, I want to thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, all the other YouTube stuff. I'll see you again on the next episode of Revive Your Daily Driver.